All right. So we are just going to stay close on the PowerPoints today. Okay. So you don't get to see me. I'm sure you're thoroughly disappointed. Haha. Just joking. But it's easier, I think, to explain these things. I don't really need to draw much today. So if I do, we'll back on out. Okay. Oogenesis is going to be not the creation of oocytes. It will be the maturation of oocytes, okay, or the eggs. Because theoretically, women are born with all of the oocytes that they're going to have their whole life. Now, what that comes to terms with or to point out is that somebody like me, pushing 40, is an old mom. Okay, and I'm an old mom. Now let's think this through. My OBGYN, I won't say his name, actually said that to me, a little stinker. Well, you're an old mom, so we should really do some genetic testing. Okay. Now why would he have to test my genetics? Well, if you think of it, my eggs are 40 years old if I was born with them. So the eggs that I have, other than the ones that have, died off, are old. So I am an old mom. And what can happen over time is the DNA can start to not function as well, okay, in those eggs. So we can be more prone to genetic deformations, okay? So it's good to have your babies when you're younger, right? Not necessarily, but it's easier. It's easier. Let's put it that way. We know those steps, okay? If you don't remember them, go back and review them. The steps from primordial follicle to Graafian follicle. Primordial is going to be the most immature. Graafian is going to be the phase right before ovulation, okay? If sperm penetration occurs, once again, we get an ovum. Ovarian cycle, so think of it. For most women, the ovarian cycle is going to be 28 days. Okay, it's the standard that we go by, 28-day cycle. It's broken down into two phases. There's a follicular phase, there's a luteal phase. Let me explain to you the difference. So theoretically at day 14, a woman will ovulate. Not theoretically, she does. Okay, so day 14, unless there's problems, a woman will ovulate. Now, don't forget, another word for an oocyte and a sperm is a follicle. So during that phase, 1 through 14, days 1 through 14, the oocyte is maturing. It is the follicular phase. Okay, it's the phase where the follicle is maturing, getting ready to be ovulated. Okay, day 14, boom, we have ovulation. We now move into what's called the luteal phase. Now remember that the space where the egg has been ovulated from turns into the corpus luteum. Okay, I want to point something out to you really quickly. Realize if you look at the ovary on your screen, it says 1 through 9. The egg, the oocyte, I'm just going to call it an egg from now on because it's easier to say. The egg, even though it's not perfectly appropriate, but the egg does not move around the cortex, right? The egg is going to stay, they're just doing that so you can see the different phases of maturation. The egg will stay in one place. It'll mature in one place. It'll leave that place. And that place that it leaves behind will turn into the corpus luteum. Okay, so the luteal phase, this corpus luteum stays as this kind of inflamed, irritated area that's releasing progesterone. Okay, and that progesterone will stay, and the corpus luteum will stay until a woman menstruates. Okay, once menstruation starts, oops, sorry about that. I'm using my hands to talk to you, even though you can't see me. Okay, so that corpus luteum will stay as an inflamed, irritated area until menstruation and release progesterone. Then at menses or menstruation, boom, it turns into scar tissue called the corpus albicans, and it stops releasing progesterone. Okay, and that drop in progesterone and the drop of, and also estrogen is going to be what starts our cycle, our menstrual cycle. Okay, so that phase during which that corpus luteum is intact and releasing progesterone is called the luteal phase. Now, one final thing, I'm sorry, I almost moved ahead. That corpus luteum will actually stay as that irritated area if a woman becomes pregnant. And that irritated area will actually keep releasing progesterone. Now, about, I forget the exact time, I want to say around 12 to 16 weeks. Yep, somewhere around 12 to 16 weeks. During that time, the placenta will become viable enough to release progesterone. Okay. Once that placenta takes over the release of progesterone, then the corpus luteum will degenerate, okay, and turn into a little area of scar tissue. And we have that scar tissue our whole life. That corpus albicans, okay, turns into scar tissue. And so you could see, theoretically, if you were to take an ovary out of a woman, you could see all the areas that she ovulated from on the scar tissue. Excuse me. Yay, female hormones. Okay, menarche is the first menses. This is kind of confusing, but basically what happens is the hypothalamus before menstruation, it sort of follows the way the levels of the hormones of the body are going. They're not very cyclical yet, okay? Once menstruation begins, okay, the hypothalamus actually will just start to kick into that 28-day cycle, okay? And it'll start to release hormones that will peak right before menstruation, then they drop off, and then they build up. Menstruation happens, they drop off. That's the basic gist of what happens, okay? Unless a woman becomes pregnant, okay? If a woman becomes pregnant, the general gist is progesterone will keep pregnancy viable and keep going, and then there will be a big burst of estrogen right before delivery, okay? So that's a general gist of hormones. Anterior pituitary hormones, remember these two. So we have gonadotropin releasing hormone coming from the hypothalamus. Gonadotropin releasing hormone, GnRD, okay, or RH, I'm sorry, gonadotropin releasing hormone will facilitate the release of follicle stimulating hormone, which we talked about the first 14 days of the menstrual cycle. During the second phase, for day 14 through 18, okay, luteinizing hormone will kick into play, okay? Excuse me. Menstrual cycle, so day 1 through 28. Let's go through the general gist of these. Keep in mind in the uterus, on the inside, or the endometrium of the uterus, there are 2 layers. The bottom layer is always there. It's called the basal layer. Okay, so the basal layer is the foundation. It's always there. It builds on top of it what's called a functional layer. Okay, a functional layer is going to have epithelium, lots of blood vessels, some connective tissue. Okay, that functional layer on day 1 through 5 will be shut off. That's menstruation. Okay, once again, hormones are at their lowest. Okay, hormones are at their lowest. You know, day 6 through 28, both estrogen and progesterone will be rising, okay, starting to rise slowly. Day 1, we start menstruation again, those hormones drop off, okay? So that's the general gist of that cycle that we've spoken about. The inside layer, the endometrium, will always have the basal layer, okay? The top layer, the functional layer, will be shut off day 1 through 5. Then it starts to build, right? Starts to builds all the way through day 28, then it's shut off again. And that cycle repeats every 28 days. Isn't that great? Okay. Now, ovulation will happen at day 14. Okay, that's pretty consistent. Ovulation happening at day 14. Now you're saying, but I know women who have their period every 2 weeks, then every 6 weeks, and every 4 weeks. That variation is going to be the luteal phase. Okay, the luteal phase can vary. So day 14 through 28, day 14 through day 20, whatever that may end up being can vary, okay? So day 6 through 14, we've talked about the general gist of that, the proliferative phase, then the secretory phase, when it's getting ready to secrete, preparation for implantation. We're releasing that progesterone. We've done that cervical plug, which we talked about before. We get to menstruation. The body either continues in a pregnancy state, right? Continues secreting progesterone and keeps the cervical plug, or the body knows it's not pregnant and it goes back to day 1 and repeats the whole cycle again, okay? Amenorrhea. Don't forget your prefixes. Knowing your prefixes helps a ton. A means without, okay? Amenorrhea means without menstruation. We'll see this, especially we'll see this in female athletes, okay? What happens, don't forget, estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone need cholesterol to form them, okay? Needs the steroid-based hormones to form them. Excuse me. Female athletes do not have enough cholesterol. So the first thing to go, this is another important concept to think about. If we are talking about physiology, all of the different systems, okay, all of our different systems. So think neurological, think heart, think lungs, think GI, okay. Who is going to be the first one to go? Who's going to be the first one to suffer? Do we really need to reproduce? I mean, theoretically in the big picture, yes. Right now, as of today, if you were sitting here and you had to get rid of one of your systems, you'd get rid of reproductive, okay? I mean, unless you're pregnant, of course. Don't take it that way. But if you are not pregnant, okay, and you need to get through just today, you'll sacrifice everything else to the reproductive system, right? This is what happens. In women who don't have enough body fat, their reproductive system will stop going through its cycle because they don't have enough of those steroid-based hormones. All the energy is going to other parts of the body, okay, and they'll stop getting their cycle. Now, the bad thing about this is that little word at the bottom called osteoporosis. The estrogen that rises and wanes during our cycle will actually help deposit bone and make our bones thicker. So what happens in young females who are anorexic, who are not getting enough food, they will lose their bone density because the estrogen is not peaking and declining, and they're losing those peaks, and that loss of peaks will actually decrease the deposition of bone into their calcium into their bones and vitamin D, okay? The really nasty thing about that is the majority of the bone architecture is established, in the teens, 20s. So generally what happens is women in their teens are the ones who are more prone to anorexia. So not only are they not getting that wax and wane of estrogen, which is so important, this is when they're building their bone structure. And there's more and more links with osteoporosis later on in life with anorexia as a child, a teenager, okay? Extrauterine effects of estrogen and progesterone, secondary sexual characteristics, we're all aware of these, increase in body hair, especially, anogenital, axillary areas, oilier skin, acne. Estrogen will cause epiphyses to close sooner. Widening of the hips in preparation for childbirth, increase in breast size. So deposition of more fat, subcutaneous fat. We need fat to make babies, okay? So we get a little bit of that layer, which gives us more of that curvier presentation, okay? STDs, so venereal diseases or sexually transmitted diseases. Gonorrhea, and if you go ahead 2 slides, we see chlamydia, are going to present very similarly. You'd have to culture them to see the difference, okay? Yellow or bloody discharge, obviously you can read through these on your own. They can lead to pelvic inflammatory disease, very bad, with sterility. And it's sad because they're so easily treated. It can be treated with even penicillin. So, because they are bacterial. So gonorrhea and chlamydia is definitely something that you want to have people have checked out. Now, syphilis, we may not know a lot about syphilis. Syphilis is weird, it's bacterial, once again. And we don't see this quite often. Nowadays, we'll see this more in third world countries. I have a friend who traveled overseas, and she actually saw a young man die from this, unfortunately. And it's unfortunate, once again, because it's bacterial. Could treat it with penicillin, for crying out loud. So sad. But what I do want to point out, it's not very clear in the notes here, I apologize, is that syphilis actually has 3 phases. So I do have tertiary syphilis under gummas. We'll get to that. Chancre would be 1, pink rash would be 2. So if you want to put those down, that would be good. Now, chancre is going to be an irritation, a red irritation at the site of contact. So when one person has syphilis, and they have sexual contact with another person, that person who has now gotten syphilis starts with a chancre. The thing is that people see it, you know, most educated people or people who know enough about their bodies will say, okay, that's not right, and go get it checked. But people who don't would think it was just maybe a rash or something unusual. But the chancre, the weird thing about it is it will go away. So it shows up and then it goes away. So, oh, great, it went away. Person thinks they're fine. Next phase is they get this pink rash all over their body. Okay. Weird, they, you know, same thing, kind of a weird presentation, pink rash, okay, oh, then it goes away. Well, great, you know, maybe they thought they were allergic to something, or who knows. You know, that could be accompanied with fever and joint pain. The really crazy thing is the tertiary syphilis, the third phase, they get what are called gummas. And gummas are actually destructive lesions that will happen in the brain. Very bad, right? Because it can kill somebody. And who knows where it's going to affect in the brain, okay? Once again, sad, it's because it's bacterial, easily treated. Okay, chlamydia, we talked about that already. HPV, human papilloma virus. I think everybody, we talked about this in lecture last night, and everybody knows what this is now, because we have the Gardasil, we have the vaccination for it. Now, the thing though is the vaccination, from what I'm told, only guards against some of the viruses that are going to be the worst offenders, probably. Okay. Now, human papillomavirus can cause genital warts. And if you've never seen a picture of genital warts and you are sexually active, please, by all means, go ahead and Google that online and take a look. And you will never leave your house without a condom again, because, and you should always have protected sex, first of all, okay, unless you're in a committed relationship. And if you've never thought of this before, Google these STDs and please be safe, okay? Because these STDs can be with you for life. These are viral, okay? This one's viral. Herpes is viral. That's it. It's done. You're going to have it forever, okay? Genital warts can be very mild. They look like warts on the genitalia, okay? Or they could be severe. They look like a little like cauliflower-like structure, not that big, but small, that grows on the genitalia, okay? But that's not the worst of it. The worst of it is HPV in females can cause cervical cancer, okay? So some of the strains of HPV are definitely immediately affiliated with cervical cancer, okay? Genital herpes, there are two types that will cause lesions, either type 1 on the mouth, type 2 on the genital area, okay? So there's two types. They are, my friends, unfortunately interchangeable, okay? So if you have type 1, you can infect your partner, okay? You can put it together. Once again, they're viral. And, you know, once again, these are kind of embarrassing things, but it's important to know that you can transmit these from the mouth to genital areas and vice versa, okay? They're viral, so once again, they're not treatable. You could treat the symptoms with a cyclovir. I'm not sure how to say that. Sorry, once again, I don't do drugs, so, but that only treats the symptoms. It doesn't cure it. So once again, please, and if you have not seen genital herpes, get out your computer, look online, and once again, you will be a big promoter for condoms, okay? Developmental aspects, so sexual development, determination of the genetics, so the genes. Please cross off second line down one of the 46 pairs. I'm sorry about that. Typo, once again, I keep forgetting to correct. 46 chromosomes, there's 23 pairs, and one of those 23 pairs are the X and the Y, the sex chromosomes, okay? XX for females, XY for males. We're all pretty versed in that. You can get, excuse me, genetic abnormalities. Turner's syndrome is going to be somebody that has an X chromosome and either a missing or a deformed second X chromosome. So these are females, okay? They have no ovaries, so they're not fertile. They tend to have short stature. They tend to be a little bit retarded, and they have a webbed neck. So it looks like they have a little webbed neck, okay? Klinefelter syndrome is a male who has two X's and a Y who tends to be sterile, smaller in stature and size. Okay. Super male, I find this fascinating for some reason, is a male who has an extra Y. And with that extra Y comes higher testosterone. There's a strong link with these genetic abnormalities in very aggressive men who are in jail. Well, not that, you know, the genes put them in jail, but their aggressiveness have led them to lead a life that puts them in jail. Okay, so kind of cool. Sexual development, this is so cool too. Sexual development begins at week 7, okay, in utero. Amazing. But one of the things that we need to talk about is descent of the gonads. Happens during the 7th month. The gonads start in the abdomen, work their way through the inguinal canals down into the scrotal sac. And what guides them, so if you imagine the, you know, the testes, okay, for the males, so we're talking about the testes, start in the abdomen, and there's actually like a cord, like a ligament that pulls them down through the inguinal canals, and the cord shortens and shortens and shortens and shortens until it's teeny tiny short, not even half an inch, like, God, 3 centimeters. And it holds the testes down to the scrotal sac, okay? It's called the gubernaculum. It's called the gubernaculum. Well, it's that strong fibrous cord. Then it's called the scrotal ligament, okay, after it shortens down and holds the testes in place. Puberty, we talked about sexual characteristics, okay? Functional sexual organs obviously will happen at puberty as well, okay? Menopause, estrogens decline, somewhere between, holy crow, that could happen to me in 6 years. Wow. All right, so 46 through 54, the actual definition is 1 year without menstruation. Okay, 1 year without menstruation. Because in some women, it'll really vary for a while. They'll have a menstrual cycle, they won't for a couple months. They'll have 2 in a row, they won't for a couple months. And the weird thing too is just something to keep in mind. As a woman is moving through that like perimenopause before she actually becomes menopausal, she's really fertile. And she is not only really fertile, she can pop out 2 or 3 eggs at a time. So they're more prone to having twins or triplets. Yay. Okay. We're not going to do the case study. And that wraps it up. All right. Thanks a bunch, guys. And next week, we'll go over pregnancy. Have a great day. If there are any questions, as usual, give me an email or talk to me in lab or during office hours. Take care.